Perfect. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today with the salary negotiation and benefits presentation. My name is Çağla, Çelik, and I'm a career development specialist with West Virginia University Career Services Center. And my pathway area, the area of specialty, is business and communications. Today, I also have my co-presenter colleague, Jessie Barclay, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessie Barclay, and I'm also a career development specialist, and I work with agricultural and natural science students. So that's the pathway I typically work with.
Yeah, we're really excited to talk to you all about this topic today because the job market is becoming increasingly competitive and students are graduating with an unprecedented student debt. And that kind of puts you in a pickle because most of the time students are very grateful to have their first adult job, and they're really excited to jump into accepting the offer without even considering what they might be leaving on the table. And we want to talk to you all about the strategy and really effective ways of thinking about your compensation package as a whole and how to negotiate your salary to kind of put yourself in a competitive position in the long run. And we have a story to share with you. Actually, it's Jessie's story about what not to do.
So this is embarrassing, and I love sharing it because it's a really good lesson that I learned in my life. So my background is actually in recruitment. I worked for a full cycle recruitment company when I graduated with my degree in sociology. I hired people and I extended offers. I knew the right things to do. I knew how to use the terminology, how to look at everything. But when I graduated with my master's, I actually was offered a position and accepted it immediately. I didn't think about it. I didn't negotiate because I was just so happy that I had an offer in the field that I was interested in. What I found out probably 2 weeks into the job was that the person that was hired at the exact same time that I was had the same credentials, the same years of experience. And getting to know her and talking to her, I found out she was actually able to negotiate $10,000 more in her base salary for the exact same job. So that's why it is so important to not only know as much as you can about your compensation package, but being comfortable to actually negotiate and talk about how much you believe that you're worth. So that's a lot of what we're going to go over today, and I'm going to let Çağla go to the next steps.
Sure. All right. So whenever you receive a job offer, like let's say you went through the interview process and finally started receiving offers, first thing you need to do is ask it in writing, because a verbal contract or a verbal agreement is never binding. And it's really important for you to look through that job offer and see the specifics and nitty-gritty details about the job posting or the position that you're agreeing to. And in that response, definitely show excitement, be grateful, thank them for the opportunity, and always ask them, if they don't indicate the date, when they need an answer from you by. Kind of, asking and specifying that timeline will help you maybe come to us and consult on that job offer, and then also give them a timely response, because when they're in a hiring process, they're extending offers to multiple people, and they kind of try to determine their top tier, candidates that they kind of do a cycle of things, right? So if you don't accept, for example, they want to go to the next person and they want to do it in a strict timeline. So be mindful of their time and always ask when they need an answer from you by, and ask the details in writing.
And another thing before that, if you get a recruiter or someone who's extending the offer and they have to have a verbal yes before they will send you something, that's okay. A verbal yes is absolutely okay, but you have to get things in writing before you actually sign anything. So I had that happen a few times too. So that's something to really be aware of.
Now, before you even think about negotiating anything, whether it be a job offer or in movies, a hostage situation, right? Or closing a business deal, you need what we call a leverage. In this situation, it's something that they really, really are interested about your qualifications, your past experiences, something that kind of sets you apart. Now, working at Wendy's as a part-time job or having a few internships, it hardly qualifies as leverage, because when you graduate, I mean, when you look around you and see the class of 2021, for example, people will have pretty much more or less the same credentials on paper and similar experiences, similar GPAs. So you need to now start thinking about, okay, what it is that sets me apart from my competition. Am I taking the additional steps to maybe look into a certification, a training program, a software that is really up and coming and very important in my field, that I can maybe use different free resources from Coursera and LinkedIn Learning to develop that skill set? So those are the type of things that you need to take into account before you even attempt to negotiate. If you don't have leverage power, you don't have negotiation power. So keep that in mind before you aggressively go into the negotiations. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about, Jessie, do you have anything to add in the leverage portion?
I think a good way to think about leverage is also with anything when it comes to the job search or your documentations is to really pay attention to the job description. It's important to save that job description. So when it comes to time to negotiation, you can go through, know what their requirements are, and know the experiences and the skills that you have that you can talk about. That's the other part with the leverage. Yes, skills and everything else, but know what they're looking for. That's the main part of this leverage conversation.
Mm-hmm. Now, the next thing, again, we haven't even gone to negotiating part yet, or even reviewing the job offer. We're kind of giving you some of the basics. The other thing you need to take into consideration is the geography.
Can I hear grab?
Oops. So I'm going to ask all the participants. We do have a few people here.
Oh man, I can't hear nothing. It was working fine yesterday.
Let's, hey Rachel, if you're still in the session, can you mute all the participants and maybe just, allow communication only through the chat function? All right, I'm going to continue. Okay, there we go. Now, we are going to talk about geography. And I guess one thing that you need to take into consideration before you evaluating that monetary amount is a relative, I guess, it's a relative thing, meaning, here's a question for you, and you can drop your answers in the chat function. What's worth more, $50,000 in Lincoln, Nebraska, or $110,000 in San Francisco Bay Area? Which is worth more? Any guesses? Nebraska? Yeah, exactly. Depends on how you like. Oh, that's right.
That's actually a very good point.
That is right, and we'll talk about that. Now, obviously, $50,000 in Lincoln, Nebraska, because of cost of living. San Francisco is literally the most expensive city in the United States, and correspondingly, your rent will be more expensive, your bills, your taxes, and the disposable income that you'll end up with at the end after all the things taken out will probably be more in Lincoln, Nebraska, because $100,000 in San Francisco it's not poverty line, obviously, but it's considered low income. So because of that, yes, Senritas, because of that, whenever you receive an offer, it's very advisable you go online and check some of those cost of living calculators and see the amount you're being offered is kind of corresponding well with the cost of living, the expenses of the area. And to kind of build more upon someone's response here about the cold in Nebraska, a lot of times whenever we do these appointments, our students come to us and the areas that they want to go into is like usually Florida, North Carolina, some of the warmer, nice areas, metropolitan cities. And guess what? People, for example, who are born in Florida, they want to die in Florida. They don't want to leave the beach. They don't want to leave the state. And luckily for them, they have a lot of good schools that they can attend to. Because of that reason, there are more degree holders than there are jobs. Think about it from a supply and demand standpoint, right? If there are more jobs, I, as an employer, why would I offer you a competitive salary when I can literally find another candidate who's almost identical on paper and who's willing to accept a position for $10,000 less? Why would I do that? Now, if you want to go to those highly desirable places, you need to think about that supply and demand relationship as well, because on average, people who make a living in Florida make about 70% of the national average. 70%. It's 30% less than the national average. On the other hand, if you're someone with a lot of student loans, if you want to save up some money in a short amount of time, you may consider some of those undesirable places, like, for example, North Dakota. There's nothing wrong with it. It's maybe a little rural, maybe a little out of the way, but if your goal is to save up a lot of money in a short amount of time, they make about 130% of the national average. It's 30% more. That's a consideration you need to look into. And that's a determining factor in terms of what it is that you identify as good salary.
Absolutely. And to kind of add to that, it's important to really start asking yourself those questions. What do I value? Do I value making that extra money so I'm okay with going to North Dakota? Or do I really just want to live by the beach? Those are the questions we want you to start asking even before you start applying to these positions. And then creating very realistic expectations of your salary range based on your research. And also, it's okay if you're open to multiple different areas to have several different target salary ranges, and just to be aware of those. That's more strategic than having one salary you know you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next point here is compensation versus salary. A lot of students get confused by these two concepts. Whenever they receive an offer, they only consider the monetary amount, which is the base salary. But you should be different from them because you attended this workshop, right? You should know the difference between compensation versus salary, and that compensation is a lot grander than just the base salary. It includes items like personal incentive bonuses, 401ks, dental vision, and all kinds of different insurance, a lot of perks, and maybe stock-based compensation. And here's a funny fact. Your benefits usually comprise, your benefit package usually comprises of 25 to 33% of your total compensation. So next time, if someone asks you how much money you're making, you consider that as well, because for every dollar you're making, 40 cents of it is basically benefits, and it's a significant percentage.
And most of the time, you don't have to question what a company is going to be giving. Larger companies these days, even in the job description, will tell you what types of benefits they're offering. So you can even make a good decision when you are applying. It's also really important to start thinking about the industries you're entering. A lot of field work experience, either in engineering or in the STEM field, they sometimes provide a company truck or a company car. Sales positions does the same. So those are the perks that every industry is going to have a little different. And what we talk about today, we're going over a lot of things, but each of your industries are going to be a little bit different. So it's important to know those kind of differences.
Yes. All right. So we do have a question. Is there a website to determine the cost of living in a city state? We will share with you a few resources here in a second. It's not necessarily specifically for cost of living, but if you literally Google cost of living calculator, it's going to give you a lot of different websites to be able to calculate that amount.
Yeah, there are hundreds of different types, and they're all pretty good.
Yes, and Allison, for your question, we'll get to that. We do have those resources, and we'll share them with you here in a second. All right. Now, the last thing you need to take into consideration is that, especially for on-campus recruiting, a lot of companies, a lot of HR departments invest into these complicated and sophisticated matrices to determine what should be a competitive base salary for you, given the geographical location and the qualifications you would possess as an average college graduate. So what do I mean by that? An average college graduate is someone with a 4-year degree who have some level of real world experience, whether it be an internship or some part-time jobs, an average to good GPA. And that basically is an average student. And in these matrices, a lot of companies specify these ranges and take all of these things into consideration before they make you an offer. For example, if you are ex-military, if it's indicated on your resume, that's an additional $1,000 or $2,000, depending on how they structured those base salary compensation. If you are in the top 10 percentile in your class, that could be another $1,000. So they add up all these little things to come up with a base salary to offer you during on-campus recruiting, right? Like for those of you who are seniors who are getting ready to enter into the job market, this is a pretty general process that a lot of companies do. Now, if they're already taking these things into consideration before they make you an offer, that means you won't really have a lot of leverage and negotiation power using your GPA because they've already taken that into account before they give you an offer. Or if you have 3 internships, for example, it's already been accounted for before they made you an offer. So you may need to look for other things, other differentiating factors to give you leverage, not necessarily these commonplace expected overall qualities.
And another thing to add to that, I love talking about this because the first thing if I would have heard this as a student is, how do I know what they're looking for? How do I know what will give me that extra $1,000? And the truth is, and this happens a lot in federal government and state government as well, if they're asking you a question about your status or about an experience you have in the application process, that's probably part of their matrix. So as you're going through the process, filling out those applications, those questions they ask you are good indicators as to what they value and to how it's going to add to your overall score and compensation. So that's something to really be aware of with the matrix.
Okay. Finally, the negotiation piece. But before you even think about talking salary with a potential employer, you first need to know your worth and basically calculate these, median salaries or average salaries for a given industry or the field that you're in. If you don't know how much you're worth, how are you going to compare the given offer, whether or not it's a good offer, right? And for that, it's really important to also consider this. An average professional here in the United States gets a pay raise of maybe 3% of their salary. So that additional $5,000 further in your career that you negotiate, and the percentage amount, like the percentage increase on that, is huge over the lifetime of your professional career. So that $1,000 increase may not sound like a lot to you, but again, when you kind of think about it over the course of like 30, 40 years, that can add up. And because of that, you need to do your research, and Jessie's going to talk about how to do research.
Absolutely. So I know that's the question that's on most of your minds, like, how do I actually figure this out? So after you start thinking about geography, where you want to be, your value system, what's important to you, then we have resources that we can really dig into. And those are on the next slide. So here are 3. There are lots of different resources. ONET Center is put out by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It gives you a lot of information about different job types within the United States, but it also gives you a range of position or of salary within state and the national. So you want to take that into consideration as one piece of you making this decision. Salary.com is actually used, it's reported by companies. So it's company reported salary information, and it gives you a bell curve. So you can actually make your decision based off of the bell curve or the national average. The same thing with Salary Expert and Glassdoor.com. Glassdoor is actually reported by individuals that work for companies. So you still also want to take that with a grain of salt, but it's still a valuable asset to put into the overall idea of creating a target salary. Mm-hmm. So when you put all of this information together, it's really important to, again, remember your geography and look specifically in the state that you're looking for. Come up with a salary that you're comfortable with or the salary you desire. And that is going to be the base that you give if you're asked. And we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but the most important thing here is that whatever your lowest range is, like the amount that you give in this lowest end of the spectrum, that is your minimal acceptable amount. So that if they give you, let's say, an offer $20,000 less than that amount, they might be lowballing you because you've done all that research, you've checked the median and the average amounts for a given geography, and anything lower than that should kind of create some question marks in your mind. So here's another question for you, Jessie. They can do all the research they want, but sometimes the timing of when to bring the salary information up in an interview, or let's start with this. As the candidate, should you bring up salary first in an interview?
Never. And the reason is the longer that you can learn more about the company, learn more about what the position is, helps you come up with a better figure based on what your role is going to be in that company. And as soon as they hear a number, like when I was a recruiter, if someone told me 50,000 and the range that I was given was actually 60 to 70,000 for that position, when I heard 50,000, I went, awesome, I can get them lower than the range. I can save my company money. And that's why this is so important. You don't want to give them the range until you've done your research and you know as much as possible. The longer you wait, the better off you are.
Exactly. But then that creates another conflict. And we're going to do a few role plays here in a second, and I'll ask Jessie these intentional questions to give you an idea. But in a lot of times in the application process, whenever you're applying for a position, they sometimes ask you to report your salary expectations in the form before even you get an interview. How do you handle that, Jessie? Like, what are some of the best practices for that?
There are a few tricks around that. A lot of times applications and applicant tracking systems have gotten pretty smart. If you can literally put the word NA or negotiable, if you can put in letters, that is a fantastic way to get around it. You can put 0. A lot of times people will do that. But honestly, if you have to put a number to get through, you need to do that research ahead of time and put that target salary, not what you're going to take as the lowest. So what you're really wanting to make.
Exactly. And it's oftentimes really advisable that you give them a range rather than a specific on the dot estimate of what it is that you're wanting to make. So, and Jessie will talk about the range here in a second, a little bit more detail. So let's talk about this. Let's say you walked into the interview and obviously you don't bring it up, but 5 minutes into the interview, the interviewer goes, so can you tell me a little bit about your salary history? For example, what were some salaries you were making in your past 2 positions? How would you handle that, Jess?
You know, I think that's a great question. But it seems like this is more of a leadership position. And in my past positions, I have not had the opportunity to have those leadership positions. So my past salaries actually don't really indicate what I'm worth in this position.
That's a great way to evade and kind of bring the focus back on to this position. Whenever you're asked those type of questions, especially earlier on, you need to resort to what we call deflecting statements. And this was an example of a deflection, specifically for salary history. If you can avoid it, don't give them the salary history that you were making in the past, because the new job may have certain, descriptions or qualifications required that is a lot grander than what you were in charge of in the past. So the other thing in terms of timing, let's say they, gave you a pass, Jessie, but the HR person is still persistent, and they're asking you, okay, well then, how much money are you wanting to make in this role?
Oh, I was that recruiter. So what you really want to say is, I'm still learning about this position. I'm so excited to be able to talk to you about this opportunity, but I really just want to stay at a negotiation stage at this point before I give you a number. That's another good way to deflect. Now,
if the person is okay about talking to Jessie about her qualifications, they'll move forward. But I'm relentless. Like if I was an HR person, I would probably push to the limits, and I would probably say something like, well, that's definitely a great idea, but before we can move forward, I really need an amount from you.
I totally understand that, but could you give me an idea of what your salary range is that's budgeted for this position?
So she's then reflecting the question back at me and asking me for my salary range. So in that case, the recruiter can do one of two things. They can either give her the range that they were thinking about, which is gold, which is an ideal situation because it gives her an idea in terms of what how her research compares to the range given by the employer. If not, if I'm still pressing, well, in that case, guys, trust your research and give them a range. So how do they determine that range, Jess? Because we said that the minimum of that range was the minimum acceptable salary by you, but how do you determine the higher end of that spectrum?
Yeah, so if you give an employer a range, you want to give at least a 20% range. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've done your research and in Nebraska, you're looking for $55,000 a year for a marketing position. And you find that actually this company on Glassdoor does do market value. So they're all probably at that 55,000. You give them a range of 55 to 62,000, which is about a 20% increase. If they really want you, if you negotiate well and you've impressed them, they're going to try to bump that up if they have it within their budget. And that's how people not only get what they're wanting and what they deserve, but also a little bit more of an increase. And I've seen that happen a lot in my past where people would know what they're saying, know the salary range, and then we would come in with like, instead of 55,000, we would say 57,000. That doesn't always happen, but the 20% range gives you the opportunity to let them know what you're wanting and then the highest that you think you're worth.
Yeah. And we just had a question here. Let's address this before we move forward. When communicating with a potential job, what if you are communicating with an HR representative or recruiter rather than the employer directly? How does this change the dynamic of information exchange and interviewing?
Fantastic question. It actually shouldn't change the tone at all. And through all of this, if you guys noticed how I answered, I was very calm, matter of fact, and assertive. I wasn't aggressive. When you're going into negotiations, whether it's with an HR representative, maybe their company policy is that human resources extends the offer. Some companies that are smaller, it may actually be your future boss. You want to be prepared to be the same person regardless. You want to be calm, collective, know your information, and use a tone that says, I know what I want, but I also want to work with you. It's not a battle, it's a conversation.
Great answer. All right, so I think we covered everything regarding negotiation piece. So if you have any questions, you can always drop it in the chat function. Now we will move forward with some of the benefits and things that are negotiable and not negotiable in that compensation package. So this is an example of some of the most commonly offered benefits, from health insurance to annual leave to personal incentive plans, which we call bonuses, right? You need to know about this before you attempt to negotiate certain elements in this compensation package. There are things that are absolutely not negotiable. What we call them universal plans, meaning every company, every organization, if they're offering a healthcare insurance, dental insurance, life insurance, retirement, pension, severance package, these are universal across the board, regardless of the level of positions in an organization. The CEO would get the exact same health benefits as basically someone who's at the bottom of the food chain, because these are pretty standardized across the board. They're called universal plans. So I don't want you wasting your time trying to negotiate something that is absolutely not negotiable, and it's not even possible. Like, you can't negotiate your retirement plan to ask for a higher percentage amount that they match for your contribution. It's not possible. If the standard is 5%, they're going to stick with the 5%. But there are things that will be absolutely open for negotiation, and I'll cover that in a few slides here in a second. Before we do that, let's move forward and talk a little bit about the medical benefits.
So, medical benefits. This is one of those things that you don't really think about until you get your first job. And there are a few questions you want to ask yourself and you want to be aware of whenever you are thinking about medical benefits. Some companies offer medical benefits and some do not, depending on the size of the company. In the chat, I am really curious, does anyone know on average in 2020, how much did the average single person pay monthly for medical insurance? Does anyone know?
If you don't know, just throw in some guesses.
Yeah, just throw in some guesses. 300, okay. Anyone else? Allison, you are exactly right. So around $500 in 2020 monthly for medical insurance. Now, this is why it's important to understand when, yeah, these are all great. Family insurance is actually about $1,200 in 2020. So that covers most people in your family or a couple dependents. That's a whole other conversation. The thing to be aware of here is when you're given, if you do have the opportunity to get medical insurance from your company, you need to know what is it that they cover. Do they cover everything? Some companies cover basically even massages. There's crazy things that you can get medical coverage on, but it's important to look through, especially if you have a pre-existing condition, to see if you are going to have coverage for your own medical expenses. And that's all going to be laid out in the package that they give you. Some companies also have multiple different packages based on whether you need a family package or not. And that's another reason to kind of really pay attention to that and read through. It can cover you. It can sometimes cover family members. There's pet insurance in a lot of companies now. So that's another thing to really be aware of. And I realized this when I started as a recruiter. Many companies, especially if it's an entry-level position, you will not start your medical coverage until you've been with the company for a certain amount of time. So if you're hoping to start your medical coverage as soon as you start the job, that's not typically how people do it. So companies sometimes will have a 3 to 6 month period where you have to have good standing, you haven't quit, and then you will receive those benefits. And that's something that Human Resources helps you with, and they let you know a lot of those different things. There's also the idea of deductibles. Every company has different deductibles. So a deductible is the amount of money that you have to pay into the system or pay in medical insurance before you have coverage. And that is also a really good thing to be aware of. I know when I first started out, it was $1,000, and now it's either gone up or down depending on the company. We can't really tell you exactly what it's going to be because every company is different, and every company is going to either pay full medical insurance or they're only going to pay a portion. And that's what you really want to pay attention to, because if they only pay a portion, then that's going to come out of your paycheck every month. And if not, you don't have to worry about it, but you need to be aware when you're looking at your contract.
Exactly.
Anything else to add to that, Çağla?
No, I mean, that's beautiful, Jessie. And that's kind of proving our point that we made earlier. Like, let's say you have a base compensation offer from 2 different companies. One is $50,000 and the other one is $48,000. But when you look at the full package, the $48,000 one gives you an amazing coverage, and you are a family, you do have dependents. And when you add up those things, maybe the whole compensation adds up to being $57,000 in the second offer, versus the $50,000 may not offering you those type of benefits. And there's an opportunity cost that you may have not even acknowledged if you didn't know about looking at the full coverage plan. And Douglas asked a question here in the chat. I'm just going to wait to answer those questions at the end. Let's cover some of the benefits first, and then I will open it up to questions to answer some of your concerns. The other thing that you need to look into is retirement. like everything else in this country, retirement is also privatized in the United States of America. And instead of companies offering you like a pension package once you retire, you are now expected to invest a portion of your salary into a retirement account. And those accounts are called 401ks. Okay. And just like the stipulation that Jessie talked about medical coverage, companies also put stipulations on the retirement funds because they want to increase their retention rate. Meaning, if you start working for a company, they want to make sure you work for them for at least a few years. And whenever, to sweeten the deal, a lot of companies offer dollar for dollar percentage match in your retirement. For example, if you are investing 5% of your salary into a retirement account, oftentimes companies will match to a certain percentage and give you free money into your retirement account for as long as you work for them. But sometimes in the contract, there might be a clause that indicates vesting. And it's super important for you to understand what this concept is and look for it specifically whenever you receive an offer. A vesting period is essentially, let me show you through an example. So when you look at the PowerPoint, you see that you have your contributions on the left side. You start working for a company, and in the contract, they talk about a 5-year vesting period in the retirement, but you don't know what that means. You signed a contract and you work for the company, you invest $5,000 into your retirement annually. Year 1, 2, 3, you're happy, everything is fine. But around year 4 for working for that company, you're getting a little antsy. Maybe some of your needs are not being met. Maybe you're getting a burnout and you're looking for other opportunities. Let's say around year 4, at the end of it, you start applying for jobs, and halfway through year 5, you accept the position and leave the company. Now, remember, your vesting period in the contract was 5 years, and you left 4.5 years into your employment contract. You're going to collect all your investment here in into the retirement account, which will add up to $22,500. But the company's compensation, the company's match, which would have been another $22,500, you will lose that money. You won't be able to take it with you because you did not honor the vesting period. So that's the power of vesting. They're going to offer you these deals, but there might be some stipulations. It's your job to understand what that stipulation is. And the vesting period could be 1 year or 6 months, or I don't know, 8 years for certain companies. It's just something that you need to understand in your contract. All right. So pre-tax options for benefits, really quickly, this is something we want to make sure that you're aware of.
Yeah, so pre-tax, first and foremost, just so everyone knows, because it was a surprise to me on my first paycheck in my big girl job, the salary that you're negotiating for is not necessarily what you bring home. It's actually the salary that you are negotiating for is actually before taxes. So I encourage you all to start doing some research on the cities and states that you're applying to. You can use ADP or Paycheck City. You can actually put in the salary you desire, and then you can see how many taxes come out from the state, from the federal, and sometimes city taxes. It's really important because in this example is actually it's an extreme version. It would be, you would be actually, instead of making 48,000, you'd be making something around 30,000, but it's not all like this. This is just for pre-tax purposes. So again, first and foremost, know that the salary that you're negotiating for is the salary before taxes. So the reason that we kind of just want you to know, there are options where you can take out your taxes before or after. And Çağla, can you give your story? Because I think your story is really helpful here.
Sure. So what happened was when I accepted my job here at WVU, I was trying to set up my parking pass. And it's apparently a benefit eligible for pre-tax or post-tax options. And the guy on the phone asked me, so ma'am, would you like to opt for the pre-tax option or like the regular tax option for this benefit? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I didn't know. So what happens is if there are benefits in your compensation package that are pre-tax eligible, it's oftentimes almost 95% of the time more beneficial to take it pre-tax, because, and you can see here in the board, they will deduct those benefits before the government taxes you. So your taxable income will be a lot lower after those deductions than it would otherwise, like you can see on the left side of the page, on the regular tax option. And if you opt for the pre-tax option, you will be saving money. So it's a cost saving measure. It is oftentimes really beneficial, but we're not tax accountants. So it's just something that we want you to be aware of, but it's not a generally accepted rule.
Exactly, just to be aware. And also, if you do decide to do pre-tax, sometimes they can still tax you at the end of the year whenever you do your taxes. So it's always a good idea to have that extra money in savings. Again, we are not experts in taxes. We just want you to be aware that those are two different options that if you know how to work it, you can save money.
Okay, now, as I promised, what is negotiable then, right? So you are a newly college grad. There might not be a lot of flexibility for you to negotiate your base salary, but some companies will be readily offer you a sign-on bonus and some others may not. So sign-on bonuses oftentimes is perfectly negotiable if you know how to add a good spin on it. For example, if you are a working professional who is looking for a job in the middle of a bonus cycle, and if you accept the position today, you will be walking away from $7,000. If that's the case for you, and if the company you are interviewing for or extending your job offer wants you to start as soon as possible, it's a point you can actually bring to the table and be like, you know, we're in the middle of a bonus cycle. If I walk away from it now, I'll be losing $7,000. Is it possible to compensate for that? Is it possible to either wait until the end of the cycle and set up my start date as such? Or you want me to start as soon as possible, I can do that. But is it possible for me to get compensated in a form of a sign-on bonus or a relocation expense or something, you know, in a different form in your company? So that is perfectly acceptable to kind of bring up. For US students, you will be moving to a different city. You'll rent an apartment. There is deposit, there is first month's rents, last month's rents, there is furniture to be bought, or maybe if your work requires specific clothing, you need to buy professional clothing. So companies know that students are cash poor. And oftentimes, sometimes they will offer you the relocation expenses or sign-on bonuses, but if they don't, it wouldn't hurt you to explore these options. And especially like if the job is in a big metropolitan area that requires a high amount of like deposit and rent, it is okay to bring that up and ask for it, because unless you ask, you won't really get anything, right, in this life. The other thing that you should not overlook is stock-based compensation. It's an incredibly powerful tool in addition to your salary. And if the company that you receive an offer from is a publicly traded company, for example, if they're offering some of their stocks as a part of your compensation package, don't overlook it. Do some research in the stock market and see the predictions about their stock price. And hey, if you want a few more stocks, you can even negotiate the number of shares you're getting from the organization. I mean, one of my mentors always gives me this example whenever we talk. One of his students back in the day started working for a company that no one knew about. That company was Amazon. And back in the day, it wasn't big, right? And they offered a lot of stock-based compensation to especially earlier on, to their employees. And those people are millionaires now because now it's an extreme scenario, but it is to kind of highlight the emphasis of the importance of the stock-based compensation.
Yeah, and it makes sense from a business aspect, because if the stock does well, it means you're doing a good job. It's encouragement to do even better at your job.
Precisely. And lastly, work flexibility. Let's say there's no other negotiation power and you are thinking about other options, it's okay to ask whether if they'd be willing to let you work from home 1 day a week. Once maybe things go back to normal and you're required to go into a physical office. If you can negotiate that, it may not matter much to the company because they're not necessarily losing money on that deal, but it could be a cost saving measure for you because it's less commuting time, it's money in your pocket, less time spent commuting, or less money spent on gas and wear and tear and all that stuff. And lastly, vacation flexibility. I only recommend this if your start date for the position that they're trying to get you to start creates a conflict with some of the other important life events that you had planned out for that point in time. What do I mean by that? Your best friend is getting married in Mexico, and you already booked the plane and made the vacation plans. The whole family is going to Mexico for a week, the first week of June. And if you start halfway through May, it only gives you 2 weeks before your vacation, and you will not have accrued enough time to claim that vacation time, right? So you need to bring that up in the negotiation phase and be like, I do have a major life event coming up the first week of June. Is it possible to set my start date after that week? Or if you want me to start as soon as possible, is it possible for me to take that week off even without accruing the time required for that time frame? Again, it will not cost them anything, but it will it will save you 7 PTO, paid time off. And it's very, very significant when you think about it.
Yeah, and another thing about work and vacation flexibility, because of the pandemic, these are two pretty hot topics because the way that the pandemic changed the way we work has made a huge impact on companies. So these are really hot topics they're thinking about, and they may already be thinking about ways that people want to negotiate now. So it's just something to keep in your mind whenever you are thinking about those things.
Mm-hmm. All righty. Now, what should you look for in a contract? Extremely important. Always, always check these things before signing a contract. Start date, because you may have established a date, but it might be different on the contract. So you need to clarify that. Your salary, base salary, some of your benefits. And you will find certain things depending on your industry, such as non-compete clause, for example. If you have this clause on your job offer, one thing you need to pay attention to is it usually happens with industries that has a book of business. For example, if you are in the financial advising industry or you're a counselor that works for a private practice, they don't want you taking the book of business, like all the clients that you were dealing with, and move to a competitor and take their business away. And because of that, oftentimes in these non-compete clauses, there are stipulations that prevent you from quitting your job and working for a competitor, given a certain mile radius. Like let's say, if it's 250 mile radius range, you can't really work for anywhere around here unless you move to all the way up to New York City. And in the past, we had students who violated this rule and start working for a company, a competitor within that range. The previous company sued the student and made them quit their job. Actually, this wasn't a student. This was the brother of one of the previous colleagues that work with us. Yeah. So this is a real event. Make sure you check that fact and make sure it's not if it's in your contract, honor it. The other thing is the relocation clause. If you are in an industry or a role that requires you to do rotations, for example, you work for this company and their Michigan plant the first year, and then you move to North Carolina the second year, and then the third year you move to their New York office. If your position is set that you need to keep changing locations and you meet the love of your life in your first placement, you won't be able to stay there. You have to move unless you quit your job and start working for someone else. If they have that clause, you have to honor it. The third thing is intellectual property. It is more applied for some of the STEM related fields, some of the creative fields as well. They want to protect the intellectual property. So whenever you are hired for the organization, whatever you accomplish, it is theirs. It is not yours. Even if, here's the extreme case, It could be worded as such that you work on a project in your garage, in your spare time while you're employed for a company. And if you disclose that, the company still owns it, even if you didn't create it in the office space.
Yep.
Because you are, whatever intellectual property you come up with is their property. So just know these things, look for them, be conscientious, and don't put your foot in your mouth.
Yeah, and I want to answer, can you negotiate a non-compete? Lauren, that is a great question. So I actually had a situation with a student last semester. It was in the STEM field. She was actually researching blueberries and blueberry genetics. And her non-compete clause was weird to me. Like I looked at it and it seemed like it was like kind of copy and pasted from someone's HR site. So I encouraged her to ask more questions. I would say in non-competes, it's not necessarily that you're negotiating, you're asking questions before you start that negotiation process. A good way to ask is, can you tell me more about this? Can you give me an example? And that is an absolutely okay question to ask because you're going to be, especially in research development, you're creating products for them. Of course, they don't want you selling that or taking that to another company. But if you're working on your PhD and you don't want to have to give them your research under a non-compete clause, you need to establish that that's not going to be taken. That was definitely, we were able to negotiate that. She was able to make sure her research was protected and she's working for them now. So that's definitely, you can, but it's more about asking the questions for clarification. Sorry, that was a little bit more than I meant to say.
Oh no, that's perfectly okay. And we'll get to the questions here in a second. Just plow through the last things we had on the list and we're good to.
Yes, so bottom line from everything we've been talking about, it is up to you on what is most important, but we want you to be aware of what is involved in the compensation package. So you have to really kind of do that inner voice. What's most important? Is it pay, location, benefits, work environment, coworkers? That's another huge important thing for a lot of people is who you're going to be working with. And putting all this together, and I love putting a checklist together and really going, this company offered me this. I'm interested in the location, but I don't really like their benefits package. If you're in a great opportunity where you have two companies to compare because you have two offers, that's the best thing to really think about. But you really need to know what your walk away is. If they give you a salary and you're still in the interview process with other companies and the salary is not up to the standard that you think you can live, or maybe you're just really not that interested, you really need to do some soul searching and make sure that it's the right company for you. So rating the importance, end of all of this is the most important thing, and it's up to you.
Mm-hmm. All right, now, last. Etiquette, whenever you're accepting or rejecting. Go ahead, Jessie.
No, it's okay. Etiquette is one of those things I love to talk about this because I didn't realize you needed to actually send a rejection. So let's say you decide you're going to accept the offer. You've gone through the negotiation stage. You need to send it in writing. HR needs to have that. If you decide you do not want to accept the offer, the negotiation didn't go well, or you want to accept a different offer, you need to write a professional letter to them. This is usually in the form of an email. As you can see here, this is a pretty good example. You don't want to burn bridges. You never know when opportunities at companies will come up again. So it's important that you start thinking about that. And if you do need help writing those, that's absolutely something we are comfortable helping. So please please reach out to us.
Okay, and this is our shameless plug of saying, hey, schedule an appointment with us if you have any questions about these things. But I saw some really great questions in the chat. So I'm just gonna go back and do a little Q&A session. So let's start with Douglas, because I think we already responded to the question before. And Douglas asked, how does negotiations work? Oops. If you're applying for a promotion for a company that you already work at and want to continue working there even after the promotion or not? So my take on it would be, whoever your direct supervisor is, if the conditions are right, schedule an appointment with your supervisor, and you will also have annual evaluations like your performance reviews, and you can even use that opportunity to talk to them about your performance. But before you go into that meeting, collect everything that you've done for the company so far, basically all your accomplishments, the things that you did really well affecting the company's metrics, and then schedule this appointment. And in that appointment, you can start the conversation as, I'd like to talk about my career progression in this company. I'd like to consult with you as my supervisor. So you can kind of start the conversation as such, and then kind of give them almost like an elevator pitch, like a sales pitch, all the things that you did and that you are ready for promotion, and see where the company is standing on the matter. So that's the best way to approach any type of promotion. Again, it's not a battle, it's a conversation. If there's not opportunity within that organization, then you have a decision to make. Are you comfortable with staying because you like your job and it's comfortable, or are you really career oriented and you want to move forward with another company and keep climbing up that corporate ladder? So ultimately, it's going to be your decision at that point. But if you're in a pickle, again, come schedule an appointment with us and we can definitely discuss these things in greater detail.
Yeah, we're really good at role play. We will play your boss and we will give it to you. So it's actually a really great way for you to, again, you're going to use the same deflective statements, even with your current boss, if you're asking for a promotion. You're really getting to that bottom line, but having a conversation, remaining very calm in your tone.
Mm-hmm. So I see a lot of questions about the recording. The recording of this presentation will be shared to you directly if you've RSVP'd and registered for the session. So that is absolutely covered. And I'm seeing Disney is really extreme with the intellectual property. Yes, a lot of companies are. So you need to read through that job description, understand what you're signing up to. And what are the best questions to ask to determine the work environment and culture? Go ahead, Jess.
Honestly, that's it. So in the interview process is where you want to ask that. So at the end of an interview, if they say, do you have any other questions? Great question to ask is, can you give me a good idea of what the culture of the work environment is? Or, you know, things such as that. And they are going to give you so much information. Most companies love to talk about their work environment and their culture. And if they don't, it's usually an indication it may not be a place you want to work. So they're really good at selling it. So I would, it's a great question to ask in the interview process.
Yes. Marco, I guess I already answered your question. You indicated you lost connection. Yes, we can definitely help you with identifying the salary ranges and whatnot in your negotiation process. Just contact us and schedule an appointment with your career development specialist. So Charlotte asks, adding on to Lauren's question, how would we ask questions about coworkers? It's kind of in line with Jessie's recommendation just now. Asking the company culture gives it away. You can talk about maybe, you can ask questions about, can you please tell me a little bit about the group projects or the projects that this company is managing, the coworkers, the dynamics and the culture. Asking those type of questions will give you an indication in terms of what those coworkers might be like.
My favorite way to ask that is, how well do people collaborate on your team? Is a good way to ask that, because they're going to, their face is going to give away whether people get along or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, pay attention to the body language, and also pay attention to your own body language too. Like if you've had unpleasant experiences in the past, you may be professional with your verbiage, but if your body language kind of shows it, it's not professional. So pay attention to it too. So those are really good. It's really difficult to toggle this.
Man, they keep coming in.
Yeah.
Yes, just quickly, we are, as career services, there are 6 career development specialists. You can make appointments with us to talk about this. And we are a free resource to all alumni. So as soon as you graduate, you can still come and talk to us afterwards.
So another question, should the turnover rate in a company be considered in our leverage during salary negotiations? Well, it depends. If the turnover rate is really high to the point where they don't care, that's their business model, they just keep taking new talent in, and people who can, stick with it can stick with the company, and the ones may leave. Well, then it doesn't really give you a negotiation power because they keep hiring new talent and are okay with the retention rate. Maybe they increase the number of people they hire because of the low retention rate. So it's not necessarily a good leverage. The leverage comes from your qualifications and what you can offer to the organization rather than external circumstances in most cases.
Perfect way to answer that. Yes, absolutely.
Is this resource through the BV available after graduation? Yes, our services are available both for WVU students and alumni.
Let's see.
Question here. If you receive an offer mentioning annual performance reviews with merit increases based on competitive practices and personal performance, is that something you can negotiate each year?
Not necessarily, because it's going to be based on your performance, and they usually have metrics already put together on what that's going to look like for each person. You can't really say, hey, can I be evaluated different than others? However they evaluate is how they evaluate. But during those annual performance reviews is where we have it's the best place to have those conversations about, this is what I've done this year. I'm looking for more money. Is this going to be a possibility in the budget this year?
Exactly. And Lauren points out that culture is always something that they played up.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. I mean, how do you speak badly about your organization when you're in an interview setting? So Glassdoor.com can be a good resource if you take it with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of bitter people posting their comments on Glassdoor.com. But sometimes if you know how to sift through those comments, you can gain really valuable information about what the company culture actually is. So are there any questions we should not ask? Well, the salary question at the beginning, you should not bring it up. What other questions can you think of, Jessie?
You don't want to ask questions that are easy to find on their website or in the job description. It's a pretty good indicator that if you ask a question that's like on the first page of their website, that you didn't do your research. So I don't want to give you a blanket, yes, there are really bad questions to ask. There are effective and ineffective questions, and they should all be based in research, and they should all be based in what you actually want to know, not you think this is a good question to ask. People can see through that. So thoughtful questions that you actually want to know about the company is the best way to go.
Vincenzo, you're asking about international students and whether they expect any differences with the job offers. Being one in the past, I was an international student. I can definitely speak to this. Yes, there are differences. Being an international student kind of takes away from that leverage power, unfortunately, and you need to be cognizant of that. When you get to that point in your job search, definitely come schedule an appointment with me, and I can address some of those international student specific concerns more on an individual basis. If I'm working in a position which costs the company money right now, registered nurse, but moving into a position where I can bill for my services, a licensed independent provider, and now make the company money, can I bring that up during negotiations as a justification for increased salary? I mean, depends on the case, but it sounds like if number one goal of a company is making money now and in the future. And if there is a revenue opportunity for them, they might take you up on that. But again, you need to make sure you're not, what's the saying, Jessie? You're not about the toes. You're not stepping on anybody's toes.
Oh, yeah, about
You're not, yeah. It's not a direct conflict of interest with your main duties. If you can accomplish that on the side and talk to maybe your mentor in the organization, your supervisor, and they seem to be in favor of doing this, well, I don't see a reason why, but you need to be careful and really, it's something that we need to dive deeper in to be able to give you a specific answer. But yeah.
Overall, especially in situations like that, if there's someone else in your department that's doing something similar, went through the same credentialing process, and it's allowed to happen, you don't ever want to bring anyone else and their credentials into negotiation ever. But it may give you an indication that it's possible. Just don't talk about it in the negotiation, if that makes sense.
Yep. And Allison, she asks, you mentioned highlighting your specific skills traits, which make you stand out and miss other applicants. Aside from emphasizing what we think they find valuable, is this a question? Basically, can you ask the employer if what it is that they value in a good competitive candidate? And absolutely, that's definitely not only a question, but also a good question, because it tells them that you're a critical thinker by asking this very interesting, specific question, and it will give you really good insights about what it is that they're looking for.
It also gives you a good opportunity after they answer to give them examples as to how you have displayed the values or skills that they're interested in.
So another question here, should we negotiate increased salary after certain years of working with the company? And I kind of answered that. The answer is absolutely yes, you can negotiate it. And now, remember the leverage power that I talked about, Senna? If you have multiple interviews and multiple job offers on the table, what is that? That's leverage. There are multiple companies that want you. And if you are smart, you can actually use that as a leverage. And let's say there's a company that you're really interested in. They're offering maybe a few $1,000s less than this other company. Well, you can then go back to the company of your choice and be like, as a normal student who is in the job search process, I'm in the negotiation phase with with a few organizations. And I must say, your company is really the one that I want to work for. The culture, mission statement kind of lists the reasons why you want to work for them. But unfortunately, they were able to come up with a better offer in terms of base salary. Is it possible for you to at least match their offer, because I really want to be a part of your team and stay with this company? So that's definitely leverage power. And if you know how to word those things and how to be strategic about it, you can use that as a good leverage.
Yep, and that's something we can help you with as well. I know a lot of times the fear about negotiation is how to say it. And that's something that I know Çağla and I are comfortable helping with as well.
Mm-hmm.
I love this question. What's the best way to ask about micromanagers? So if you're interviewing with your potential future boss or future supervisor, the best question to ask is, can you give me some insight into your management style? And that is going to give you an idea of how they operate. Without saying the word micromanager, because it's kind of not the best term. But yeah, I think that's a good way. I hope that answers that question.
Mm-hmm. Is it unprofessional to bring a list of questions to an interview? No, actually it's not. And we usually, I know, it's a good strategic move when you think about it, because we always recommend that students kind of bring a portfolio of some sort and have copies of their resumes, cover letters, some examples of their past work, their questions that they want to ask to an employer. And it's even okay to bring a notepad. I mean, don't be a secretary in the interview process, but jot down some of the important points and conversation elements into that notepad, because later on, whenever you write a thank you letter, those notes will come in really, really handy. And it shows interest, like, hey, I'm listening to you, but what you're saying is so important that I'm also jotting down some notes. Yes. So that's definitely not unprofessional at all.
Yes, I love it. It also shows you did your research, you put thought into it, and you're not just coming up with questions on the fly. So I love having that. When I interviewed people, if they had questions already, I was like, yes, I'm going to fill this position soon. So it's just something good to do.
Catherine asks, how quickly should you accept or decline an offer? What is seen as professional length of time to make a decision, especially if you're in multiple negotiations?
Great question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
So there is not a perfect answer to this. It is a great question, and we all think about it. You just need to be in constant contact with the people that you're negotiating with. Sometimes human resources get back to you and they will tell you, we need to have an answer by Friday, whatever they say. Sometimes, let's say you get an offer and the next day you get another offer. The thing is communicating. So if you reach out to the first employer and say, I still need some time to look over this. Can I let you know by next Friday? They are usually pretty okay with that. Again, one thing for you guys to really be aware of, hiring takes a lot of time and effort. If they're bringing you in for an interview and sending you an offer, they want to hire you. and they don't want to have to start the process all over again. That's why we highly encourage you to always negotiate and to just ask questions. Don't demand, ask. And it's always okay to ask.
Absolutely. That's a great answer. And that job offer gives you leverage. That is leverage because like Jessie was saying, the process takes a lot of time. And if they have already moved forward with you into that level of the process, they don't want to back down. They want to keep you. So obviously don't push the limits, but it kind of gives you some flexibility to demand certain things like an extension on the deadline for an answer or work flexibility and things in that nature. All right. Well,
That's it.
oh, perfect. We appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, like I said, the recording will be sent to you to the email that you registered or your Mix account most likely. And if you have any questions in the future, remember to schedule an appointment with Career Services Center to go over your job offers and how to basically negotiate a specific salary for a specific position. Yeah, our pleasure. And Kaltume, schedule an appointment for that because it's a specific question. And yeah, I don't want to do it in public.
Thank you guys so much. Please,
Yeah.
you can schedule an appointment with us by going on Handshake or emailing the account. And if you have any other questions, we're here. But thank you so much. We're so happy to talk about this topic. It's something that's important.
Yeah, it is. All righty. Well, you all have a great day. Let's go Mountaineers.